right. No, it's supposed to be naked. We're still waiting for a couple of stragglers to come up from the basement. As soon as they do, we'll get started here. Nope. Anybody else down there, John?
We sent somebody down to check.
Okay. Two more people down there?
Coming up, yep.
Okay.
I think it's Pat.
How's everybody doing this morning? Good. That's all right. I'll put you to sleep, buddy. I'm worse than pastors preaching.
I don't know about that.
Whoa! Man, who said that? All right. Hey, John, would you do me a favor and close that door? The sun's kind of shining through it here. It's kind of blinding me. I can't see my notes. All right, we're going to get started here. Thank you all for coming out today. It's a great honor to tell you about my father, Staff Sergeant Peter C. Stamatis, and his experiences in World War II. World War II began on September 1st, 1939, when Hitler's Germany invaded Poland. France and England came to Poland's aid, and the European continent was thrown into war. The United States tried to maintain its neutrality, although we did favor France and Britain. All doubt about whose side we would join ended on December 7, 1941, when Imperial Japan attacked our naval forces at Pearl Harbor. On December 8, 1941, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt asked for and received from Congress a declaration of war against the Axis powers, primarily Germany, Italy, and Japan. By the time the conflict ended on September 2, 1945, with the unconditional surrender of Japan, Germany had already surrendered on May 7, 1945. More than 16 million men and women served in the United States Armed Forces. Of those 16 million, approximately 291,000 would die, and another 417,000 would be wounded. My dad was one of those brave 16 million. When pressed about his time in the Army, he would just say, "We had a job to do. I just did what I had to do." He was humble about the awards and medals that he won. He would get angry with me when I persisted in knowing how he won his Silver Star and Bronze Stars. Once he glared back at me and said, "Mark, don't you understand? They give you medals for killing people." And the conversation ended. I was a selfish young man who only wanted to know about the glory of the battle and didn't understand the burden my father must have carried because of the meaning behind those words. My father wasn't the only one from his family who served in the military. He had 3 other brothers who served. His brother and my Uncle Chris served with the Army Air Corps in Australia and New Guinea in South Pacific. My Uncle Tony was with the 44th Reconnaissance Battalion in Italy, and my Uncle Steve was with the 60th Infantry Battalion of the 9th Armored Division, serving in France and Luxembourg. It was on August 25th, 1942, that my father received word that he was drafted. He was to report to the Army Medical Board No. 1, located at 1250 Ontario Street in Cleveland, Ohio, for his physical on September 4th, 1942. and on September 18, 1942, he was inducted into the United States Army. From September 26th to October 24th, he was at Camp Wheeler, Georgia, assigned to Company A, 14th Infantry Training Battalion for basic training. The Army must have seen some leadership qualities in my dad because he began to take training to become an officer. Between October 24th and November 10th at Camp Wheeler, he was assigned to the Potential Officer Candidate 17th Infantry Training Battalion. On November 10th, 1942, his application for becoming a reserve officer was approved. On the application, my dad had written, "If I qualify, I will be pleased to accept the commission in the Army." My dad was about to become one of those 90-day wonders that you in the military can relate to. After he was accepted, the first step in preparing him to become an officer was to go through non-commissioned officer training, or NCO training. He began his training and was just about to graduate with his class when fate stepped in and changed the course of the war for my dad. I always encouraged my dad to write about his exploits during this time. It wasn't until late in his life that he actually began to share those memories. Recently, I visited my sister Tina in Meadville, Pennsylvania, and she allowed me to borrow Dad's writings. I'd like to share with you what he wrote about this period in his life. Quote, "Took the lonely trip down the Rap at the Terminal Tower to the railroad station for a trip to Camp Perry. Got fitted for Army clothes and ditched our civilian clothes and boarded a train to Macon, Georgia, and to Camp Wheeler for basic infantry training. While there, went to non-commissioned officer school in preparation to go to officer training school in Fort Benning, Georgia. Just before we were to graduate from NCO school, my father passed away, and I came home to attend his funeral. See, fate had stepped into my father's Army life." He continues, "When I returned, my class had already left, and I was left behind. I had nothing to do and no one to report to, so it was sneaking off to Macon, Georgia, and having a good time." I don't know how much fun he could have had at that time. His pay was $50 a month. Finally, the jig was over, and on May 25th, 1943, I boarded the Queen Elizabeth and zigzagged across the Atlantic and arrived in Scotland on June 2nd, 1943. The next day, we took a tram or a train to Lichfield, England. I didn't know the name of the outfit I was in. I didn't care. Anyway, we were guards for GI prisoners, not MPs, just guards. I didn't know what they did, and I didn't care. I did not particularly like the assignment. I would take the prisoners out for exercise, and as soon as we got out of range of anyone seeing us, we would sit around and take it easy. If I had any cigarettes, I would share them with my prisoners. I never said I was a good guard. I just did not enjoy guarding American prisoners. The camp was run by a Master Sergeant Steele with hash marks up to his armpits. He was an old-timer. All he wanted us to get him was some aqua velvet shaving lotion. He never left camp, so don't ask me what he did with the aqua velvet. He was a pretty good guy. We were on duty 48 hours on, 48 hours off. So when we had a couple of days off, we would take the train to Birmingham. Occasionally, we would go to London, but when we were broke, we would go to a pub in Lichfield where we could drink a warm glass of beer and listen to the old grandma singing. There was a blackout in England, and practically every evening there would be planes going over, and we would have to worry, is it our planes or Germans? And don't forget the Battle of Britain was going on at this time. Foggy and damp every night. You couldn't see a foot in front of you. had to carry a small flashlight which you used sparingly. Several months before D-Day, a prisoner grabbed a weapon from one of the guards in the evening formation. He began to threaten some of the guards. Without even thinking, I walked up to the prisoner and asked him not to do anything foolish and to give me the weapon, which he did. I don't know why, I just knew he would not use it on me. I always treated the prisoners humanely, and I was sure he would not hurt me. I never heard any more of the episode. I don't know if it was covered up or not. Anyway, a friend of mine, Angelo Salerno, and I asked for a transfer from the outfit. And not long after that, we were shipped out to a repo depot back in Scotland. Now, I do have to mention, at this time during Dad's early time in the Army, he wasn't even a citizen of the United States yet. Even though his family had been living in the United States for a while, my grandmother, who was pregnant with my dad, went back to Greece. This was probably not, he was born in January 1920, so maybe late 1919 is when she went back to visit. So she went back to back to Greece for a visit. And the family story is Dad was born on the boat while she was coming back. But in all likelihood, he was probably born in Pyrgos, Greece. He had to become a naturalized citizen, and this happened on August 19th, 1943, while he was over in England. Dad also wrote about the time he was in the repo depot. His story continues. After morning formation, the sergeant would call fall out, and my friend and I would go out the back door and spend our time in the forest nearby. They really weren't supposed to be doing that. At the depot, the soldiers were given new shoes before the invasion, and we would gather the old shoes and bargain for breakfast in the homes around the forest. The other soldiers never knew what happened to their boots. Anyway, eventually we were all sent to a holding location in southern England where we were not permitted to go anywhere, waiting for what was to come. What was to come was my father was about to join F Company of the 2nd Battalion of the 357th Regiment of the 90th Infantry Division. Now, the 90th Division actually had 2 battalions of the 359th Regiment attached to the 4th Infantry Division, which landed on June 6, 1944, D-Day, at Utah Beach in France. Because of that attachment, the 90th gets to wear the invasion arrowhead that you will see on my dad's campaign ribbon, if you look on his medal board. The balance of the division landed by June 8th. My dad, as of operations. Unfortunately, its beginning wasn't so lustrous. From the get-go, it was evident that the leadership was lacking and their training for fighting in hedgerow country was absent. The Army measured success by how much ground is won, sometimes regardless of casualty count. Unfortunately for the 90th, it was losing many men with little to show for it. As an example, the 357th Regiment, which my father would shortly join, typically fielded around 3,000 men in World War II. Beginning on June 10th, in 4 days of fighting, they had 703 casualties, including 133 dead. When you take into consideration the rear echelon troops, like your headquarters, transportation, quartermaster, signal, medical, engineer, those units outnumber the frontline troops by at least 2 to 1. You can see the carnage. The other regiments in the division, the 358th and the 359th, had similar casualty numbers, and the objective they were sent to achieve still wasn't won. It got so bad that General Omar Bradley, who was in charge of the American forces in France, was advised to break up the division and send its troops to other divisions as replacements. The 90th was deemed a problem division. Between June 8th and July 30th, the 90th Division would have 3 different division commanders before one was found that could lead the men with any efficiency and boldness. Many of the regiment and company commanders were replaced as well. When I finally convinced my dad to start attending the division reunions they held every year, I got a kick out of him telling them that they didn't straighten up as a division until he joined the outfit. Every objective we were given, we obtained, he would tell them. We never retreated. It was at these reunions that I gained access to many resources the historians of the association brought. It was there that I found the morning report showing my dad was assigned to F Company of the 357th on June 23, 1944, with 97 other enlisted men from the 92nd Replacement Battalion, 12th Replacement Depot. It was also on this day my dad was awarded his Combat Infantry Badge. This badge is awarded to infantrymen and Special Forces soldiers in the rank of colonel and below who fought in active ground combat while assigned as members of either an infantry or Special Forces unit of brigade size or smaller at any time after 6 December 1941. Dad writes of his joining the division. We arrived in France a few days after the invasion as replacements, and as we marched to where we were to join our new division, the odor of the dead animals was really putrid and obnoxious. Not only were there animals on the ground, but there were also Germans and even a few American soldiers still laying around. When we reached our destination, we were instructed to find a foxhole and get in it. These foxholes were at least 6 feet deep, and the bottom of them were filled with water. We were in the foxholes about 15 minutes before we were shelled, and before I knew what was going on. Why all the noise, and what seemed like hundreds of enemy coming towards us? I realized that it was my heart beating so loud from fright, and the shells exploding in the air, causing tree bursts, with branches hitting the ground hard. That was confusing, while raising up to see if there was anyone coming towards us, and dropping down as to not be hit by the shrapnel. It wasn't long after the shelling was over, I heard shuffling and soldiers coming towards us, and it was a good thing that I challenged them before I shot at them, as it was Captain George Young and a group of our soldiers who came out to see if any of us were hit by the shrapnel. It rained continuously the first few weeks, and we had to bail the water out from our foxholes with our helmets, while digging new toe holes to try and keep our feet out of the water. What you would do, whatever the level of the water was in the bottom of your foxhole, you'd dig like a little shelf above it, and you'd stick your feet in there to try and keep yourself above the water to keep your feet dry. The shelling continued throughout the war, but we just got to know if it was the enemy's or ours, even knowing if it was going by or about to hit near our position. Now, unfortunately, this is the last thing that my father wrote about his war experiences that I can find. What follows is the information I've pieced together from the morning reports I have found, or information sent to my dad from the Assistant Division Historian, Norm Richards, or just one of the few times that Dad would tell a story. Also, I wrote the division newsletter asking if anyone knew my dad, and if so, would you please tell me anything you may remember about him. I was fortunate that several wrote me back and helped me fill in a little bit of my dad's history. I should mention at the time my dad joined the 90th, his rank was a private. The next little bit of the paper trail we have came from Norm Richards, the assistant historian. Norm took a real liking to my dad at the conventions. Anyone who met my dad, you just had to like him. Anyway, Norm lives in St. Louis, where the Army personnel records are kept. On his own time, he searched through the records and found several things for us. One was the morning report of July 14, 1944. That showed that Dad was promoted from private to staff sergeant. Perhaps they learned that Dad had taken NCO training, or perhaps he just proved himself worthy. I like to think it was the latter. I know my dad was proud of the achievement. With new leadership at the top, and also at many lower positions, the 90th's fortunes began to change. On August 1st, 1944, the 3rd Army under General George S. Patton was activated. The 90th was one of the divisions attached. For the balance of the war, Patton would be their leader. As the war in the hedgerows was finally won, the Army decided they needed a breakout to turn the Germans' flank and start racing across France. The 357th was assigned to take the town of Le Mans. It was here in this battle, on August 8, 1944, that my dad was awarded a Bronze Star Medal. He thinks he got the medal because he told his lieutenant, "Just stay put and we'll handle it," whatever it was. His citation reads, Peter C. Stamatis, Staff Sergeant, Infantry, United States Army, for heroic service. In connection with military operations against the enemy in France on 8 August 1944, entered military service from Ohio. Dad said during this time, frequently the troops were mechanized, meaning in trucks chasing Patton's tanks. I don't think he particularly liked this because he said the German Air Force would shoot up the columns. On September 28, 1944, Dad was actually mentioned in an article about the 90th Division in the Plain Dealer. The headline read, Our Fighting 90th, Fit Though Muddy, Clevelanders with Patton Ready to Give Best, by Roloff Loveland. He writes, It should be a matter of pride to those at home to know so many of our lads belong to this outfit, which will surely go down in history as one of the cracked American divisions. It has caught hell, but it has always given better than it got. Staff Sergeant Peter C. Stamatis, 24, of 1435 Brainerd Avenue, Northwest, used to be a cabinet maker before he entered the service 2 years ago. Now he is a platoon guide. His closest call when a shell landed about 6 feet away. That is too close, much too close. He looked fine today. He looked ready to dish it out. That's pretty shocking. Dad was ahead of his time. Social distancing back then, 6 feet away from mortar shells. Amen. The division was racing across France, taking towns, crossing rivers. Dad said he must have crossed 100 rivers. Town fighting was especially hard. Many times it was house-to-house fighting. Dad told me one story about mouse holing. Now, he didn't use that term. I think it was coined by authors of books after the war. But basically it was this. You were inside a building, The enemy was outside in front of that building, so you couldn't get out that way. There was no back door. So what do? Well, if you have a bazooka, you blow a hole in the back wall, hence mouse holing. Well, Dad told a story where they were inside a house, and one of his guys was about to blow a hole in the wall so that they could get out. The only problem was there were religious pictures and crucifixes on the wall, and my dad made him wait until he took them all down. Can you imagine that? There's a battle going on, and Dad's over there, wait a minute, I got to make sure these pictures don't get blown up. I don't know. That's my dad. Another story Dad shared with me was when his men were dug in some woods outside of a town, and he was told to bring his men into the town to pick up their water ration. Now, the only problem was the Germans were shelling the road with 88s. My dad told them they didn't want their water ration. Then he was told the captain ordered them to come in and get their water ration. Well, you can imagine what happened. While coming down the road, the Germans started shelling, and 2 of his men were wounded. Dad went and found the captain, who ordered him into town and read him the riot act. Dad basically told him, I told you I didn't want the water. Now I have 2 men laying in the ditch because of you. But I think he said it in army talk. Dad said he yelled at him so much he thought he was going to be court-martialed. But later on, he heard through the grapevine, the captain said Dad was one of the best soldiers in his outfit. The Third Army was now approaching the fabled fortress city of Metz. The 5th Division was attacking it proper, while the 90th Division was approaching from the north. Memoirs was the next objective for the 357th Regiment. From the division's campaign record compiled after the war, we read, on October 7th, the 2nd Battalion, 357th Regiment, which my dad was a part of, initiated its attack on the town. By day's end, approximately half the town had been taken, but resistance in the form of street barricades, thickly strewn mines, violent mortar and artillery fire, and grim house-to-house defense made complete occupation of Memoirs a difficult, if not impossible, task. So vital did the Germans consider this northern outpost that a constant flow of reinforcements poured into town. This added enemy strength, plus the serious shortage of ammunition, made further progress tenuous and slow. No all-out effort was made, therefore, to reduce Memoirs in one crushing blow. Instead, a new plan was evolved. The contested city was to be made a practical training ground in which new methods of street fighting were to be perfected. Deliberately calculated attacks with deliberately limited objections by companies, platoons, and squads were launched. Experiments were attempted, lessons learned or rejected in this, the most practical war college in the world. This is the battle my dad was wounded in, trying out different methods of attack in an urban setting. Wow, talk about playing with somebody's life. Anyway, Dad told me they were fighting house to house when he opened a door to a building and expected to lead into a dining or living room. Instead, it was a hallway with circular stairs leading to the 2nd floor. He started up with a couple of guys behind him, and the Germans started throwing grenades down at them. Dad said he was the first one up the stairs going in, but the last one going down, so he caught the blast. He ran outside and started giving orders to his men when one of his guys told him he had blood running down his leg. Dad told him he had to go to the aid station and he would be back soon. The date was October 11th, 1944. So Dad made his way back to the 2nd Battalion aid station. He was written up as wounded in action, and the doctors called it by bazooka fire, penetrating right calf shell wound. Typically, what they did at the aid station was remove the bullets and shrapnel, did the debridement, which is the cutting away of dead or contaminated tissue from a wound to prevent infection, cleaned them up, poured penicillin and sulfur into the wound, wrapped things up, and sent them to the rear. Dad was allergic to penicillin, so I don't know if they did that to him or not. Next, they sent Dad from the 2nd Battalion aid station to the 315th Medical Battalion, which is the division's medical branch, and from there he was sent to a hospital in England. They couldn't get all the shrapnel out of Dad's leg. They said it was too close to one of his veins, so they left it in. He had that shrapnel until his dying day. So from October 11th, 1944, to I really don't know when, I can't find the morning report showing when he returned to his unit, but I know it was after the Battle of the Bulge because he was not credited with the Ardennes Battle Star on his campaign ribbon. He did receive the Purple Heart because of his wounds. Dad said of this time he was no hero, and he was in no hurry to get back to the fighting. When doctors would touch his leg, he would act like it hurt so much he was about to cry. Dad had a weakness at an early age for sweet and sugary things, so his teeth were really a wreck. They did a lot of dentistry while he was incapacitated during this time. Well, finally, Dad's leg was well enough to rejoin his outfit. Best I can figure, it was at the beginning of February 1945. The division was entering Germany proper, and fighting was particularly fanatical. On March 15, 1945, my father was awarded a Silver Star. In the rank of medals you can receive, this is the third highest. You have the Medal of Honor, then the Distinguished Service Cross, and then the Silver Star. Dad's citation reads, Peter C. Stamatis, Staff Sergeant Infantry, 357th Infantry, United States Army, for gallantry in action on 15 March 1945 in the vicinity of Edenhausen, Germany. While moving through the town, an infantry assault squad was subjected to intense machine gun fire, which wounded one member of the squad. Realizing the critical situation, Staff Sergeant Stamatis voluntarily and at risk of his life left the position of comparative safety, charged through the withering barrage, and silenced the machine gun's fire. He then organized his men in strategic positions and so inspired them by his heroic actions and skillful leadership that repeated counterattacks by a numerically superior force were repelled until supporting tanks arrived at the scene of action. His gallantry enabled his unit to hold the objective and was in accordance with the high military tradition. Entered military service from Ohio. My brother once asked my dad, "Why did you charge that machine gun nest?" Dad answered, "One of my men got hurt. When one of my men got hurt, that made me mad. and I wanted to give back to them more than they gave us. One of the reasons Dad never wanted to talk about his experiences was he was afraid that we would find about this history on him. And he told me once, he said, "Mark, if there's ever a war, I don't want you guys thinking that you have to be a hero." He was quite a guy. The division continued its drive through Germany, eventually going into Czechoslovakia. I have one more story to tell you that my dad personally told me. It was when he captured by himself about 125 to 150 Germans. As Dad told me the story, he was running down a road when he came around a bend and ran into a battalion of Germans who were bivouacked in a field. He said his men didn't follow him, but hid. So he walked into the camp and said, "Take me to the commanding officer." They took him to a major or something like that, who spoke English, by the way, and Dad told him that they were surrounded and they'd better surrender. It was towards the end of the war, and many Germans wanted to surrender to the Americans, so the Russians didn't get them. So the major agreed, although he did say he wanted to surrender to someone higher than a staff sergeant. But Dad told him, "No, you're surrendering to me." After gaining assurances from Dad that they could keep their personal belongings, the Germans began to lay down their arms and began marching towards the American lines. It was at that point that Dad's men started coming around, and after all the weapons were collected, they started taking all the jewelry and stuff from the prisoners. To the victors go the spoils of war. Well, it kind of ticked Dad off because he wasn't even recognized for his actions on that day. As I have said earlier, Germany surrendered on May 7th, 1945. After the war ended, because Dad had been over in Europe a lot longer than his division had been when he was with the prison camp, coming over to England in 1943, he had amassed enough points to be able to go home. Since the 90th still had to stay, Dad was transferred to the 66th Infantry Division and came home with them. Before Dad left, the Army again approached him about staying in and going to officer training school. And Dad contemplated it for a while, but in the end decided against it for one reason. I'll be like Pastor here and ask, does anybody know why he turned down the offer? What was the one reason? Close, but no. I'm sorry? Not in Europe, but they were still fighting Japan, and he didn't want to go over to the South Pacific. On September 28, 1945, Dad sailed from Europe back to America, arriving on October 4, 1945. On October 16, 1945, Dad separated from the Army at Indiantown, Pennsylvania. Uh-oh. He came back to Cleveland and met my mother. They were married on October 5th, 1945. Was it 5th or 6th? One of those two. At this time, I'd like to... I mentioned that Dad had several of his buddies that when I wrote to the association, and they wrote back, said they knew my dad, and they told me some of the recollections about him. Now, you have to understand, these guys are probably in their late 70s, early 80s when they wrote these things. Memories get foggy. Circumstances probably aren't exactly how they remember them as they wrote them. And but they're pretty close. You can pretty much see some of the things that they saw in my dad. So, this is from Bill Bays. He wrote, "I was an 18-year-old when I met Pete Stamatis on June 14th or 15th, 1944 in Normandy, France. We both were in the 90th Division. I was a private, and Pete was a sergeant and my squad leader. We soon became good friends. In October 1944, we were trying to secure a small town on our way to Metz. It was house-to-house fighting. There was an 18-year-old boy who would put his head out the window to draw enemy fire. Pete told him to stop. The next time he put his head out, he was shot in the neck. Pete was yelling orders and calling medics to take the wounded out. I looked at Pete and saw he had blood running down his leg. He said he had to go to the aid station and would be back soon. He returned a few weeks later. Was that soon? I was squad leader until he returned." Well, his 2 weeks was actually a few months. So when you're in war, I guess every day just mulls into the next. Pete returned and was our platoon leader. We had crossed the Rhine River, and it was in a small town not far from the river. We were going from house to house searching for prisoners. Pete had went off by himself across a body of water to check out an old castle. He called us to bring some boats. Pete, Sergeant York of World War II, had captured approximately 175 prisoners by himself. So here's validation. Now, the details might not all fit, but the fact remains that Dad captured all these prisoners. Near the end of the war, we were traveling through a dark, thick pine forest. I was behind Pete. Pete was holding a compass, and a colonel was in front of him. Pete asked the colonel, what was he doing out there? He told the colonel that he might have shot him and to get your butt to the rear. After the war ended, we were moved from Czechoslovakia to an old China factory in Germany. One morning after I had finished shaving, Pete asked if he could use my razor since he had lost his. I went back to our room. When Pete returned, he handed me the handle of my razor. He had lost the other part down the drain. Pete did not keep his personal items very well organized. In September 1945, we started home. It was a happy time since the war was over and we were going home. However, it was also sad because we knew we would never see some of our buddies again. On July 1995, I spent a night at Pete's house and was treated very warmly by his family. I enjoyed my stay. And the next letter is from Cy Seifert, and he wrote this to me when he says, "Dear Mr. Stamatis, I happened on your note about your father and the recent 90th Division Bulletin and obtained your address from the editor. Pete was my platoon sergeant in January, February, and March of 1945. It was probably February, March, and April. I was an 18-year-old replacement and was with the outfit such a short time that he would have no reason to remember me. However, I certainly remember him. He was probably the bravest, toughest man I have ever had the privilege to know. The 357th was in the process of retaking territory that had been lost in the Belgian breakthrough, so our fighting consisted of capturing manned bunkers in the Siegfried Line and retaking villages. It was in a village fight that I first encountered your dad in action. We were fighting an SS division, and they fought hard. My squad was pinned down by a guy with a machine pistol. We tried to fire back with M1s, but we were no match for that gun. Pete appeared with his grease gun, a mass-produced .45 caliber automatic similar to the Tommy gun. He was famous for that gun and his use of it, even taping 2 magazines together so it didn't take long to reload. Now, my dad would differ with him because he says the only thing, he used in World War II was the Tommy gun and a .45 caliber sidearm. So, but you know, people remember things differently. When bullets are flying, are you going to say, "Oh, what kind of gun do you have there?" I don't think so. I was hiding near the door and would stick my gun out and fire in the direction of the German. Then he'd pop out of his doorway and fire a burst with that darn burp gun. He didn't say darn. Spraying bullets all over the house. Pete sidled up to the door, stepped out, and fired a burst, then stood there and waited for the guy to fire back. They were firing point blank at each other, no more than 50 feet apart, and your dad just stood there with his feet spread apart, blasting away with that old grease gun, no match for that Smizer, but showing no concern until the other guy dropped. That was some experience for me, a kid just fresh out of high school. He was with the 357th much longer than I, and was very well known for his fearlessness. He covered a lot of territory and was not always with our squad. A platoon is made up of 4 squads, so he was the platoon leader, so he had to go all between all the other squads also. Squad typically had between 10 and 12 men apiece, so Dad was commanding between 40, at full complement, 40 and 44 men, 48 men, but obviously they were never a full complement in war situation. But we knew all about him. It doesn't surprise me that he hasn't discussed his experience as much. He was there much longer than most and saw much that he'd like to forget, but you should be proud of him. I was hit the day after we crossed the Rhine. We had occupied a village, and during the night the Germans infiltrated, and I was shot during the fray. Pete may remember the day. I was in the same house as Maul. I corresponded, Maul was one of my dad's sergeants underneath him. I corresponded a couple of years ago with a couple of others that were with F Company longer than I. They would certainly know of many more occasions. I'm sending them your address also in case they missed your note. I first contacted them through the bulletin also. I also wrote to John Harness and learned from his widow that he passed in 1997. Hagedorn told me that Mel Fletcher, our platoon leader, had died some time ago. Very best wishes, Cy Seifert. Now, the gentleman that he sent me, the addresses that he sent me, I wrote them, and their families wrote me back and told me that their father had passed away already. So I couldn't get any additional information from that source. So anyway, Dad came back to Cleveland and met my mother, and they were married on June 5th or 6th. October 6th. Thank you. I know, the why it's confusing me is my sister was born, if Mom and Dad got married on the 6th, my sister was born on the 5th. So that's, I didn't know which one was which. I got to write it down on my calendar. But the story doesn't end there. Oh, did I say they got married on, yeah, October 6th. But the war story doesn't end there. I said I couldn't find any more of Dad's war experiences he had written after his first day at the front. But he did write something after the war. For at least 10 years after I came home, I fought the Germans in my sleep. My wife woke up with many of black eyes in the morning. It lasted a long time, but it finally stopped. Mom would have to go around with sunglasses on all the time, just to hide the bruises. Now, I forgot to look up when the Iraq War was, but I think it was back like 2000 or something like that, maybe a little bit earlier. Lately, it seems like this Iraq war has gotten to me, as I again, on occasion, have the same reaction, fighting in my sleep. When I was awarded the 10% disability, I asked the doctor who examined me what would happen if the shrapnel did not exit my body, as there was some shrapnel too close to my veins or whatever for them to dig all of it out. He answered that I would most likely have a blood clot and I would die. And he was serious about it too. It was not in jest. For better or for worse, I have had 3 blood clots in the last 9 years. They must not have had Coumadin in those days. My feet are heavy and are always aching and do swell up during the day. And when I'm in a noisy room, and even when there is just loud conversation, my ears hurt so bad that I have to cover my ears. I do believe that all the noise that we had to endure during the war period did not help and aided my condition. There is a human cost to war. The emotions kept inside, reliving horrible situations. Yes, Dad was a hero to me because he was my dad. But let's not forget the 291,000 heroes who gave their lives for this great cause called freedom. I mentioned earlier my dad had 3 brothers. Who went to war with him. What I didn't tell you was only 2 came home like my dad. The real hero of the family was the youngest brother, Steve, who on the first day of the Battle of the Bulge was killed, December 16th, 1944. He's buried in the American Cemetery in Luxembourg. On reflection, I would like to read to you a quote written by Lieutenant Colonel Hugh F. Foster III, United States Army retired, who wrote about the soldier in World War II. In World War II, the individual rifleman was supported in his mission by a seemingly overwhelming amount of combat and support power. But from his foxhole in the forest or jungle, he could only see a few yards in any direction, and the vast majority of support was not apparent to him. His squad was always short a few men, and he knew full well why those men were not there. His own machine guns, mortars, artilleries, tanks, and close support were sometimes visible comfort, but they did not preclude him from having to advance with his rifle to meet the enemy, who also had the support of machine guns, mortars, artillery, tanks, and airplanes, and defeat him up close and personal in encounters that left the survivors exhausted and shocked, their skin, clothing, and equipment darkened by the accumulated dirt, sweat, and gunpowder. The men in the combat elements of a rifle company faced a bleak future in which virtually everyone would be killed, wounded, injured, taken prisoner, or felled by illness. That the soldiers who served with the cause of freedom and fought so nobly for mankind and their comrades knew this dismal reality, yet soldiered on. In spite of it, is a wonder and a great testament to the character of the American GI of World War II, whose footsteps I followed with awe and great pride. May we remember the sacrifices those before us have made and make sure freedom remains in our great nation. Thank you. Are there any questions? Yep. For those of you who may be listening on the internet or watch this later, the statement was made that when we did go to the reunions, there actually were people from France that would come to the reunion, and they were so grateful to the American soldier for liberating their towns. And all across France, there are monuments and statues and memorials for those many who were killed, and for others, unit designations of thanks for what we did for them, liberating their country. Yes. I know Heather asked me about the story about the drawing down here. That was drawn down in the bottom. Now that the seaman who drew that, if I looked on the morning report, he actually joined the outfit the same day that Dad joined it. And in July 1944, in Normandy, France, he drew that picture of my dad, and he gave it to him, and we've had it ever since. It was hanging on his wall at his house. Any other? Yes. The question is, did my dad ever encourage or discourage us from entering the military? My dad was pretty neutral on it. He was going to let us make up our own minds. He would rather that we not, because he knew the horrors of war. Anything else? You're very welcome. No, the French were conquered, so there wasn't much they could do. They were a conquered nation. Well, they had the underground. Well, and Britain was there too. They got pushed off the continent, so. Right. John? The statement was that, what'd you say? Dad was a humble man, just an ordinary man, and that's true. But he loved his comrades, and that's, he had a responsibility. He took upon that. He was like the mother hen. He had to watch after these guys, and he wanted to make sure that they all got home safe. And, he would expose himself before he would expose his troops. So. Yep. If you come down and look at the battle ribbons, like I said, that Dad won the Silver Star. He had 2 Bronze Stars. He had a Purple Heart. Now, the second Bronze Star he actually had to fight for. He always said, I know I got more medals than this. I know I got more medals than this. And he finally, when he figured out how to go about the process, doing the process, he wrote the government, and they checked back on the records and everything and said, yes, you did deserve a second Bronze Star medal. So they actually issued him a Bronze Star medal. There's a little certificate that goes along with it that shows it. So, see if I can find his paper here. I don't think I have it in this one. Nope. He got that. The campaign ribbon, he got for being in, and I didn't bring that either. Steak. Bronze Star. All right, the Bronze Star, there are criteria for a Bronze Star. The Bronze Star Medal is awarded to any person who, while serving in any capacity in or with the military of the United States after 6 December 1941, distinguished himself or herself by heroic or meritorious achievement or service, not involving participation in aerial flight, while engaged in an action against an enemy of the United States, while engaged in military operations involving conflict with an opposing foreign force, or while serving with friendly foreign forces engaged in an armed conflict against an opposing armed force in which the United States is not a belligerent party. And I'll read the Silver Star, and then I'll try and answer your question. The Silver Star is awarded to a person who, while serving in any capacity with the U.S. Army, is cited for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States, while engaged in military operations involving conflict with an opposing foreign force, or while serving with friendly foreign forces engaged in armed conflict against an opposing armed force in which the United States is not a belligerent party. The required gallantry, while of a lesser degree than that required for award of the Distinguished Service Cross, must nevertheless have been performed with marked distinction. Soldiers who receive a citation for gallantry in action for World War I may apply to have the citation converted to the Silver Star Medal. So it's a degree of involvement in the engagements, of exposure, of, you know, I guess the Army ranks your actions, and you have to have witnesses, they have to write it up and everything. I mean, to get an honor of medal, man, you really got to go above and beyond type stuff. I mean, it's amazing what those guys did. So, it's just the degree of engagement that you did. Bronze Star is a little bit lower. Yes. The question is, did Dad ever get to meet General Patton? And to Dad's recollection, no. No, that was the McGlatt's dad. Yeah, that was McGlatt's dad. Poe. He was over in Italy. Yeah. Anyway, World War II Victory Medal, Eastern European, African, Middle Eastern Campaign Medal with 4 campaign medals, the Good Conduct Medal, and Dad to this day, well, he didn't understand how he got the Good Conduct Medal, although he did tell me they never caught me. Yeah, he did some stuff that he probably should not have done. So, anyway, anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Nope. Nope. Well, the way he justified it was at the end of the war, the Germans were just surrendering en masse because they just wanted to be over. They wanted it to be over. But, you know, to have someone say, hey, good job would have been nice too. He did say that there was an incident earlier that he told me where they did, I don't think they captured 100 Germans, but they captured a large amount, and it was his lieutenant who said, you know, you have to surrender, and the commanding officer of the German force said, I'm not surrendering to you, and he had to go get the captain to surrender to the captain. So when the lieutenant heard that my dad captured all these guys, he was mad. He was mad. Anything else? Well, I want to sincerely thank each and every one of you for coming out today. It's my privilege to talk about my dad and to keep alive his memory, and especially his war history. He was special to me. I was afraid of him growing up, but he was special to me. He was a tough man, and looking back and reflecting, I think I know why. He kept a lot inside. He had a lot of turmoil for all that he was going through, that he just wanted to keep inside. And great love, great dedication to his family. He did, yes. Yeah. See? Fortunately, probably not. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Oh, you're very welcome. Yep. Soldier wanted to do his job and then come home. So, anything else? All right, I thank you very much once again. Come on up and look through the, you're allowed to look through this stuff. Now, this book down here is actually what this whole talk is, precipitated this whole talk was the information that I gleaned from my dad and morning reports and citations and things like that.